Okay, we are live and ready to start.
Hi. Ready.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'd like to call the meeting to order. First item is to approve the minutes from the February 20th finance meeting. I would
So
please
moved.
make that motion. Is there a second?
Got a second.
Second, thank you very much, Mayor. Second, any discussion? If not, all in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye, opposed?
Aye.
Minutes are adopted. Thank you. We have 3 action items today. 2 are naming opportunities, one at Eastern and one at Southern. And the last item for action is going to be the fund balance policy that we have. But we are going to start with the naming opportunities. I understand we have all the folks here ready to discuss those naming opportunities. And the first one I'd like to call on is at Eastern Connecticut, and that's Dr. Phil Elmore, Eastern's interim vice president for institutional investment, to present the name for naming. Dr. Elmore, excuse me.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you and meet you all as the interim and still relatively new. This is my first chance to interact with all of you, so thanks for the opportunity. I'm pleased to bring to your consideration this morning the naming of Eastern Connecticut State University's baseball field in honor and recognition of Coach Bill Halawadi. Coach Halawadi served as the head baseball coach from 1969 to 2013, and he won 4 national championships during that time frame. Was the first Eastern coach to do that. Numerous championships, conference titles, etc. 12 College World Series appearances. Just a stellar record on the field over a prolonged period of time. He's been recognized widely in a variety of places, including our own Athletics Hall of Fame, but many other halls of fame as well. 3 that are of particular note: the American Baseball Coaches Association, the National College Baseball Hall of Fame, and the New England Intercollegiate Baseball Hall of Fame. Recognizing his achievements. He was Coach of the Year 4 times during his tenure, and just a lot of regional and conference honors. We were approached, we being the university, were approached by some alumni recently, and it actually was just before I arrived in December. We were approached by some alums asking about initiating an effort to name the field in honor of their former coach, and so we went through that process. And since that time, and the numbers have changed since what you have in front of you, but a little over 90 donors have given $105,000 to $110,000 currently, with pledges that put us well over 150,000, which is where we thought we wanted to be for this. We have 2 other fields named on campus that were named with $100,000 donations, and so we felt like this was a good figure for a field that's been in existence for quite some time. And we then approached the University Senate for their endorsement and approval. That has happened. You have that in your packet, the minutes from that meeting, unanimously confirmed by the Senate, with one comment that I'll mention to you is like, "You mean we haven't done this already?" was the reaction from one of those folks. And so we're pleased to continue the process through committee and to ask for your endorsement to continue to move this through, that we name the field in honor of Coach Halawadi and his outstanding on-field record, and the support of the university community, including a sizable number of his former players, more of which I think will come to the table as we go through the process. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation, certainly well-deserved. I know of him in the past, and I would gladly take any questions from any of the members of the committee. Are there any comments or questions anyone would like to make? If not, then I would make a motion that we accept the motion to name the baseball field at Eastern Connecticut State, the Bill Halawadi Field, or the term whichever you prefer, as we go forward. All those in favor, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you very much, Marty. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye,
Aye.
opposed? Thank you. Motion's passed. Congratulations, congratulations to Mr. Halawadi. I'm sure he has a
Thank you very
well-deserved-
much.
Thank you.
I
Hey, Phil.
appreciate it very much, and we'll be happy to pass that information on to the family and know that we'll be moving to the next step, which, as I understand it, will be the full board. So thank you.
Phil, could
Mr.
you
Chairman,
also
did you
let
have
us,
a comment?
yeah, could you let us know when the dedication is going to take place, in case those of us who could be there will be there for that quite esteemed honor?
Yes, absolutely. We've been holding off setting that date until we got through this process. Your all's approval will make us feel comfortable moving to look more firmly at a date. And we want to make sure that we give people enough time to make travel arrangements, because a lot his former players are all over the country, and many of them are going to want to get here. So if I had to guess, we're looking at late June, maybe even into July, depending on family availability. But we will certainly let you know,
Thank you.
and would appreciate any and all attendance we can get.
Thank you. Thanks for the comments, Marty. Any other comments? If not, thank you very much and congratulations again. We'd like to move on to our second proposal for renaming Southern's Jesse Dow Field House. At first, I thought they were going to rename the Jesse Dow Field. It is not. It's the Field House. And I'd like to call on Michael Kingan, Vice President, Institutional Advancement, Terrence Jones, Director of Athletics and Recreation, and Greg Bernard, Director of Alumni Relations, to make that proposal. So, Mr. Kingan?
You're on mute.
Mute him. I believe you're unmuted now.
Maybe on his end. Maybe
Mr. Kingan? You speak so we can hear you? You're muted?
Yes, can you hear me?
Now we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Please
I had
proceed.
to switch. Thank you. I appreciate it, and thank you for your time today. I'm Michael Kingan. I'm the Vice President for Advancement at Southern Connecticut State University, and as you said, I'm joined by our Director of Athletics, Terrence Jones, and Greg Bernard, our Director of Alumni Relations, both of whom worked very intensively on the relationship with Rob Parker, who we are bringing the naming opportunity to you today. So Rob is a distinguished alum of Southern. He has had a long career in broadcasting and in sports journalism and in writing. He currently has a podcast in Los Angeles, and he is also involved in radio and sports broadcasting in the Detroit area as well. he resides in Los Angeles. He has been a valued donor to us over a number of years, and he also has been a lecturer and a mentor to students in our communications, and particularly those students interested in sports journalism. We have over the last year been talking with Rob. It's important for him to make a difference philanthropically, and he wanted to put in place a long-term relationship with us. We began also discussing ways to recognize his gift and have, I think, as you know, we go through a process of identifying lots of different spaces on campus, and so that it's fair and comparable, we identified lots of rooms and spaces. Since this is a physical structure, this is the press box at Gestow Field. Our stadium is a relatively smaller stadium. The press box has no running water and no elevator access, so it's a fairly simple structure, but it's a prominent structure. And Rob was interested and is interested in the naming opportunity of the press box. In the packet, we have provided both the documents of his gift. So Rob is making a $250,000 gift that is combined outright gift of $50,000 and a $200,000 bequest. He is over the age of 60, and so under our policies, that bequest is countable as far as recognition. I would say that it is also we have in the gift agreement terms that he must provide, it's a life insurance policy, and he must provide annually to us proof that he is current on making those payments. The last thing I would say about his charitable gift, this money is to support internships for those interested in sports journalism. And he has already, begun with that. I think that we will continue talking with him about his long-term gifts. I would surmise that he will continue to do much more than this. We wanted to put both the outright gift and the bequest in writing so that we knew at least the structure of where we're headed. And then we will continue having conversations about his continued philanthropy. So the naming opportunity is the Rob Parker Press Box within Gestow Field. And I would be happy to answer any questions, as would Terrence and Craig. And I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. I would make the motion then to accept the naming of the press box at Southern Connecticut State University, the Rob Parker Press Box. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mayor. Any discussion then? Any comments or discussion before we vote? I think you did quite a good job explaining that. And with that, I would call for a vote. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. The motion's carried. Thank you very much for that. The last item we have, action item we have before us, is the new fund balance policy, which will be explained by Lloyd. Lloyd, would you care to take off on that?
I'd be happy to, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Regents and others. The fund balance policy, go ahead and put it up, if you would, please. And just leave it on the cover, fund balance policy cover. The fund balance policy revision was motivated by concerns that have been raised about elevated levels of reserves across the system. Now, those elevated level of reserves are shown system-wide in aggregate, and we'll show a presentation later in this meeting to show you what those levels are. But not all institutions have elevated levels of reserves. So I want to make sure that that's clear. But what is clear, and what I will show you later, is that most of the reserves that we have are for debt service. And then there are some reserves that are set aside at the institution for various projects. And that set aside is important because we have not been getting the bond funds over the years that would be appropriate for deferred maintenance and other projects on our campuses. So oftentimes in that environment, presidents have to set aside operating dollars to deal with deferred maintenance, and other challenges on their campus. So all of these concerns raised, motivated the idea of coming up with the new system fund balance policy. Go to the previous one up. You go to the first level. Did you say, no, I want the fund balance policy. No, that's the reserve report. Go up to the first blue.
Right here.
Go to slide number 1.
It's just a little. Sorry about that.
It's fine. So with that, I'd like to thank, before we get started with this, I'd like to thank the CFOs across the system and the controllers across the system. This was an effort that was a shared effort across the system. I wanted to make sure that the CFOs and the controllers coordinated with their respective presidents so that this policy reflected the will of the presidents more than the will of finance professionals, because they are the ones that have to lead their institutions. They are the ones that have to make the decisions about investments on their institutions. And of course, the board has a role in making those investments. And so this policy tries to strike a balance between giving the board proper authority over the use of fund balances and giving the president's proper autonomy and discretion in the use of dollars within reason. So what you see here is a summary of the fund balance policy in your packet, starting on page starting on page 73. You will see the draft fund balance policy. And let me also thank those of you, including Regent Casamento, for providing copious comments on the policy that we have incorporated as much as possible. And if need to, we can incorporate additional comments made here today into the policy in time for a vote, well, in time for the board meeting and board approval. But what this simplified policy does is apply to all CSU institutions. That was not true before. Before, we were still dealing with one set of policies for the universities and one set of policies mainly for the community college. And Charter Oak, I believe, had its own policy, or it wasn't as explicit. So this unifies all of those practices within one policy. And it sets prudent parameters within which acceptable reserves are allowed. The old policy was very specific about set-asides. It was specific about 5 to 7% contingency. It was specific about the amount for accrued compensated absences. It was specific about 2% to 5% of auxiliary expenditures, as well as debt service. That level of specificity didn't serve us well. In fact, it compelled us to set aside more than was necessary. And I believe that's one of the reasons why we saw growth in our reserves over the years, particularly for system office reserves, which grew over many years simply by collecting more in debt service transfers than we needed. The new policy will set a 30-day threshold on the low end and a 90-day threshold on the high end for reserves associated with our current unrestricted fund balances. To be clear, the current unrestricted fund balances means the unrestricted fund balances that do not include the designated funds. So when we say current fund balances, it does not include the designated fund balances. And in a couple slides in the later report, we'll show you the distinction between the undesignated funds, which we call current, and the designated funds, which are governed by the policy as well. This new policy also mandates 1 year of debt service coverage. Now, to be clear, there is already 1 year of debt service coverage at this, what they call the Special Capital Reserve Fund. When a bond is sold to investors, once we get the proceeds from those investors, we will start by, GIFA, who is our lending agent, will start by setting aside 1 year of fund balance, 1 year of reserves in what we call the SCARF, the Special Capital Reserve Fund. That's 1 year of coverage. This, what I'm proposing here in this policy, is the second year of coverage. It's coverage that we maintain at the institution instead of at the SCARF. If we tap the SCARF, we're already in trouble. So what we want to do is have coverage beyond the SCARF so that we can assure the markets, the bond markets, that we have proper coverage for what we are selling and that we can get the most favorable rate possible. This new policy will also provide guidance on reporting and monitoring, and in particular, it'll establish mid-year and annual reporting requirements. Typically, we only report fund balances at the end of the year when we report our financial statements. What we would like to do now is have at least one interim report on fund balances during the mid-year reporting cycle so that we don't have to wait until the end of the year. And finally, this new policy establishes requirements for enforcement. In particular, it will seek action plans from either the chancellor for system office reserves or the presidents for institutional reserves when they exceed the limits governed by the policy. Now, this policy will also give the presidents a fair amount of discretion to set aside funds as they need them for one project or another. Slide, please. That's good. Next slide, please. So this slide shows what the days of operations looks like under the policy we are proposing. Now, remember I said the policy calls for current unrestricted fund balances to fall no lower than 30 days and no more than 90 days of operations. Now, one of the questions we have that I think is worth debating is whether days of operation should be thought of as business days or calendar days. Most of our operations are certainly taking place on business days, but as a university, we have students on our campuses. There are even weekend services. So the idea that we would think about calendar days here is a reasonable one. But what I have done is in this calculation shown on this slide is use 260 days out of the year, which is consistent with business days. Happy to change that if that's the will of the board. So Central Connecticut State University, for example, has 8.6 million in current unrestricted net position. That would amount to 10 days of operation. That's sort of, you see the red numbers for Central, Eastern, and Western Connecticut State University. They're showing 9, 6, and 13 days of operations just with their current unrestricted fund balances. In the next slide, I'm going to show you what that looks like when I consider all unrestricted net position. But this is what it would look like. This is what the policy would govern. It would say that Southern Connecticut State University at 24 days of current UNP is within the policy. Charter Oak College, State College, has 31 days of current UNP. That places them within the policy. And as a system, we all together represent about $276 million of undesignated UNP, represents 56 days of operation system-wide, which falls within the proposed policy. The red falls below the 30 days, and the yellow markers fall above the 90 days. And indeed, the concern that was raised about elevated fund balance levels mainly fell with CT State and with System Office. And what we will present later in the next presentation are some ideas of what we might do at the System Office level to send some of this money back to our institutions. Slide, please. So if I think about all unrestricted net position, not just the current UNP, if I think about all of it, this is where we stand. Central has $119 million in UNP. Eastern has $51 million in UNP. Southern has $74 million, and Western is sitting on $16 million. CT State is unique because of its recent consolidation of 12 community colleges into one. It has $235 million in unrestricted net position. But if you looked at that by campus, meaning if you took that number and divided by 12, it would be on average about $19 million per campus, which if you compare that to the peers average just below the first line, you'll see that CT State's peers average about $29 million in unrestricted net position. So on a campus by campus average, CT State is lower than its peers across the nation. When you look at the universities, you'll see that for public master's universities, the average across the nation is $65 million in unrestricted net position. And the average for public research two universities is $175 million of UMP. And you'll see that comparing our universities to these peers, you'll see that we're very much on the low end of UMP relative to our peers nationwide. If I converted this particular measure, the unrestricted net position in its entirety, if I converted that to days of unrestricted net position, you'll see it's 126 days for Central, 102 days for Eastern, 75 for Southern, and 31 for Western. If you considered it for CT State, it would be about 120 days. Now compare those days to the peer average days of UMP. At CT State, their 122 days of UMP is very consistent with the average for other community colleges. You look at the universities, it's very consistent with others, in some cases a little high, in one case a little low. So we feel like the fund balance policy will help us manage our fund balances a little better, maintain a range within which the unrestricted, the undesignated unrestricted fund balances can reside, but the designations are such that the board can, the policy will give the board authority to approve designations. And the policy will give presidents some flexibility below $500,000 to designate funds for projects that they see as important for their campuses. And the policy will also give the chancellor the right to approve changes or approve designations that the board would then ratify at their next meeting. First, the finance committee, and then the full board. So there are proper controls in the policy to maintain a proper level of fund balance and control its growth. So with that, we'll stop and take whatever questions regents might have. Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Lloyd. Does the implication of days, is the implication what we're saying that if we don't get any more money today from any source anywhere, this is how many days we have to fund our operations going forward?
That's correct, sir.
What's
On a 5-day per week basis.
And what's the likelihood of us not getting any more state money or tuition money for this?
The likelihood of us getting no more tuition money is very low. Certainly, there's concern on tuition revenues with regard to enrollment trends.
Right.
The likelihood of us not getting any money from the state is also very low, even though the state may choose to reduce our funding levels at any time.
Okay. Yeah, because I think this is all about managing risk, right? And then having enough oxygen to deal with a problem. It's an interesting statement, or it's an interesting where we need to land on this to strike the balance of utilizing funds for the best outcomes of our students and faculty, but also, you know, keeping funds in reserve for the rainy day, right? It's
right.
Yeah. Anyway,
it's all about striking a balance for risks.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Charlene, Regent Casamento.
Thank you so much. So, Lloyd, this is very helpful. I guess if you were to flip back to the slide before this, where institutions have designated, and since Central is first, we'll use them as an example. The change in their unrestricted reserves from last year to this year, which the financial statements weren't published until February-ish, was $43 million. And so what I'm seeing here is we're calling this UNP, but I mean, it's essentially someone has identified all but $8 million as a designation. And given that 43 million just kind of became, I'm going to use the word recognized, although the campuses definitely know, and you know, pretty close after the year ends, how many days they will have. So I'm struggling with this kind of self-designation here that's producing this chart. And so if in the end, if this is going to be a driver of decision making and really be something that the regents are going to hold the campuses responsible, then this, I think, has to have a few more belts and suspenders, right? I would be more interested in understanding, you know, there's a difference between I want to save for this thing out in the future versus I have this real commitment here that I've already obligated. And clearly we're not going to try and commit that. So again, I know that this is an important step forward in terms of taking a step back and making important changes to the fund balance policy. But if this becomes the management tool, there has to be, I think, more specification as to what counts and what doesn't count. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Casamento. I think that's a fair comment. I think that what we have tried to do, again, we were working with the institutions themselves to craft this policy. So it's meant to support the institutions in the way they feel they can be best supported, but also be responsive to the board's concerns about elevated reserve levels. To speak to any surpluses that might be large, certainly in an environment when we are mitigating, when we are reducing our expenditures, but we wind up getting more revenue. So we may reduce our expenditures because the governor and the board asked us to, but the legislature might have a different idea. And so under that scenario where expenditures go down and revenues go up, that tends to create elevated surpluses that then get added to reserve levels. As it relates to the policy and how it treats designations, it sets a $500,000 limit on designations above which the board must approve, below which the presidents have discretion. That is a concern, and we'd like to hear from the board because that's the critical piece that drives designations and the authority to make designations, to set aside funds for one project or another. In terms of the ability to deal with emergencies, urgent issues that arise that may require the use of some reserves, certainly if they don't have it in the current UMP, which is I'm showing on the screen right now, these are levels appropriate for something that's more urgent. But if these levels are not sufficient to address an urgent need, then we have the ability to seek board approval or chancellor's approval to draw down reserves for that urgent need. And even in the case where the chancellor would offer approval, that approval of the chancellor would have to be ratified by the board according to the new policy. So I will take Professor Cunningham's comments and then go back to Regent Casamento. And there may be others that I just don't see on the screen. You may want to track participants' hands. But let's start with Dr. Cunningham.
Thank you, Dr. Blanchard. Just circling back to Chair Gway's question about, risk management. In my view, we have a case study of how many reserves we actually need, which was COVID. That's exactly the type of crisis that these funds are for. If I would refer everyone back to my remarks of February of last year, where I pointed out that during COVID, I think we spent in the single-digit millions of our reserves during that crisis. So there's many different ways of viewing what the optimal amount of reserve holdings are, but COVID suggests we have plenty. I appreciate the fact that we have looked out for the interests of anonymous bondholders by setting aside some funds. But of course, we've also committed to our students to offer a certain level of educational quality. Management and faculty have together agreed that through our contract that only 20% of our course sections should be offered by part-time faculty. I'd like to read through a dashboard the percentage of sections offered by part-time faculty at one of our CSU campuses. I won't go through the whole list. World languages, 77%, accounting and BIS, 66%, political science, 60%, art and art history, 60%. Okay, all triple what we think is appropriate, we agreed is appropriate for these disciplines to offer with part-time faculty. So I would ask regents, as you consider these types of policies, is that we have also made promises to students about what they will find when they come to our campuses in terms of their educational experience. And for the disciplines I just listed, we're not meeting the promise for those disciplines. That's what these reserves should be spent on, to actually deliver on what we've promised to our students, not only to bondholders. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Professor. I will say in response, while the pandemic was probably a very unusual example of an urgent situation, there are others that can arise that are not so awesome, not so large. For example, the federal government right now is considering policies that would affect higher education across the nation. The Mark in the House Education and Workforce Committee is suggesting that universities pay for debt that the students default on. That legislation is suggesting that the government should cap Pell Grants, should eliminate subsidized loans, and should limit the access to PLUS loans. And so that will have an impact on our revenue. And so one of the things I'm doing right now is try to calculate that impact. I've read the legislation, I've read the summaries. I'm just trying to calculate the impact because we will have to consider our reserves as a way to shore up losses as a result of those policies. So that's one of the areas that I think is the sort of most imminent concern that I would like for us to consider as a board, as a system, and certainly I want to communicate that to each of the institutional CFOs. Regent Casamento?
Thank you, Lloyd. I guess I just want to go back to the designations. So the policy rightfully increases the threshold for board approval from $250,000 to $500,000. That $250,000's been in place, I think, for decades. But at this point, there's been a whole lot of designating that's happened since the last time I recall an item being brought to the board. So will there be, for all of the designations that are in place, something that will be shared with the board since for a period of time these designations weren't coming forward to the board? So at least the board has some visibility and can gain comfort, and especially in the ones that are identified in the red, that even though they've been designated, at the end of the day, if we can't provide services to students or keep the lights on, some of those designations may not be the high priority, and may not have commitments, right? There's some level of flexibility, and you know, I struggle, like I said, with the idea that there's only 9 days of flexibility once all the self-designations have occurred. So I recommend that some further work be done in that area, if possible, to think about how we handle all those designations that just kind of have occurred without any board involvement.
Thank you for your comment. I will say, each year in June, before July 1, beginning of the fiscal year, we seek approval from the board to approve our spending plans. And in those spending plans are the proposed transfers for that year. Transfers that will come from the institution to system office for debt service, for example, transfers into a fund for designated purposes. Now, I've only been here a year and a half, so I don't know the long practice in this regard, but that's where it should take place. It should take place during the approval of the spending plan, and any designation that a president will plan for that fiscal year should be included in the transfer section of the spending plan. So whether that has taken place in the past, I know it has taken place in terms of the transfers to system office. I suspect we can double down on diligence to make sure that the institutions make sure that they put their designations in their spending plans so that the board has awareness, even if it's not something, well, they'll approve it with the spending plan, but they certainly would have awareness if it falls below the mandated threshold.
Thank you. I'll go back and look at last year's to see whether or not there were tens of millions of dollars outside of those reserves needed to plug the spending plan identified for designation. But thank you, Lloyd. I appreciate it.
Sure, thank you. And I think it's important for the regents to understand that if you've not had time to look at this policy and you think you need more time to consider the details of this policy, particularly since these concerns were raised, then we can, we could either defer this to another meeting to vote on, or we can vote on it today to defer it to the full board.
Comment on that. If we have more questions, we may have to defer it, but it'd be best if we could vote on it today so we can move it forward.
So are there other questions by members of the committee?
Yeah, what's the headline of this vote, Lloyd?
The headline of the vote is we have a new fund balance policy that sets different limits that focuses on the current unrestricted fund balance limits on the one hand, and makes clear where the authority lies for designations. The authority lies with the presidents below 500,000 and then with the board above 500,000.
Okay, I mean, my intent, my interest is to free up as much money for the institutions as possible with a rigor around what goes into what bucket or what kind of allocation. But this is, tuition money and taxpayer money, and it should be deployed as such. So I want to make sure we use it. We retain reserves for rainy day, of course, and other obligations. But for sure, the accountability has to be with the institutions to deliver the educational experience we committed to, as Dr. Cunningham said.
Absolutely, agreed.
Aaron?
Thank you. Is it fair for me to assume that this is just kind of like a first step in a cleanup process here regarding reserves?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. We saw the increases in reserves over time. We did an analysis to show why and how that took place. We'll talk about some of that in the latter next, I think, in the reserves report. I could go straight to it if you wanted me to, Mr. Chairman, but yes, this is the first step in a larger process to get our reserves right.
Any other comments?
I have a question. Charlene, do you think this is a good idea or a bad idea? Not to put you on the spot, but I am.
Regent Stewart, I am happy to answer that question. So I think that having the board adopt a new policy makes a lot of sense. There were, as Lloyd pointed out, a lot of unexpected funds that flowed through the system that are unlikely in the future to flow through at that magnitude. And this question of what to do now next with this opportunity. And, I think having a really open and honest conversation about what they are, what they're designated for, and how does that align with the priorities of the system. And as Regent Cunningham has pointed out, in terms of meeting the needs of students. And so the one part of the policy that I struggle with is how so much of the reserves are already gobbled up in some designation when, more than 100 million of them just were recognized in the last couple of months. So I think to Chair Guay's point, if everything is already spoken for, I don't know how we move the system forward to a financially sustainable model, because people have, and unless these things all align and come to bear on that process. So I'm excited to see that we're having these conversations, but I do want to make sure, especially voting members of the board, have an opportunity to make sure that how we've decided to spend these, I'm going to still call them one-time resources, because I think it's unlikely that these are going to grow at the same pace, that they'll align and making the system all that it can be for students and the higher education system as a whole. So, those are my thoughts. Happy to talk with you offline if you want a deeper conversation.
I think it goes to your comment, Aaron, that this is a step forward and there's more work to be done. It's not complete and finished. Professor Cunningham?
Yes, I just wanted to respond to one thing, the tendency to refer to these as one-time funds, because we had this discussion among some CBAC planners about what these funds represent. According to my calculations, we could hire 200 AAUP faculty members for 40-year careers at the median salary and benefits with the funds we have available. That's not one time, that's 40 years. That's the scale of these reserves. So I don't personally view them as one time. They could support full-time faculty in the classroom in these disciplines where we are over part-timing. So I just wanted to offer that remark as well.
Thank you, Brendan.
May I just clarify? My point on the one time was more focused on, I wouldn't imagine over the next 5 years that we're going to be able to add another $400 million to these reserves. And nor would I want to see that happen, because that would not be in the interest of students. That was my point on the one time, just to be clear.
Yeah, I think Charlene, you made a good point. Brendan, you too. I think Charlene's talking about one time as inbound funds, and Brendan, you're talking about outbound for deployment. So yeah, good call out by both.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Yeah, I would say there is this does need to be a multi-step process, and maybe this is the first step. But I think we should call out the next step for the board meeting at the end of the month and say that maybe that is around what Charlene talked about, which is the rubric of how the institutions develop designations, and what's the framework around that, and what's kind of in play and what's out of play. And I think we should provide guidance around that, because if we don't, each institution can just earmark everything for designated, and those funds just stay, for lack of a better word, in limbo. And I think we need to provide that guidance from the top to say what could be designated and what shouldn't be.
I think that's a fair point, Mr. Chairman. I'll tell you what I can do is, as we get past this meeting, after this meeting, I could send this policy along with a set of, summarizing the comments that have been made by the CFOs, by the controllers, as well as by the regions, particularly Regent Casamento's comments, and share those with the full board via email, and give them plenty of time to consider the comments within the context of reading the policy, and then bring their thoughts and ideas to the board meeting on the 28th, and we can have this debate in full with all board members so that we can settle on a policy that all are comfortable with. When we pass that policy, I don't think is as important as making sure everyone is satisfied with the policy.
Thank you. Any other comments? And I'd like to make a motion that we move this item forward to the full board and discussion take place, as you mentioned, Lloyd. So with that, I would make that motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made, seconded. No other comments? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Very good. Motion opposed? Thank you. Motion passes. Thank you very much. And thank you for your conversation. Thank you, Charlene. I appreciated your comments especially, and those of Brendan's. As we move forward, those are the three action items. We have two information items before us. One dealing with the CSCU system reserves, which I know everybody is concerned about. And with that, I'll turn that over to Lloyd also. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me apologize first that we decided to put the action items first on the agenda before the information items. In this particular instance, it would have been better to put the information item, this particular information item, before the action item. So my apologies, but I think this continues the process of rolling out the conversation about our reserves and what the proper level of those reserves and the proper authorities related to those reserves should be. Next slide. What this report shows is simply the status of our reserves to remind the public and the committee of what they are. This slide shows our unrestricted net position, UNP, system-wide. The $635 million is comprised of $358 million that has been designated and $275 million that has not been designated. Next slide, please. Now, I didn't include the slide that shows the growth of reserves, but I can say that for some board members, I've shown a slide that showed that the growth in our reserves took place after the pandemic. You could see before the pandemic, it was at modest levels. After the pandemic, for at least a couple of our institutions, they began to shoot up significantly. So the second bullet here on this slide shows that one of the main reasons for the growth in reserves is that we did get access to a large pot of federal funds, to more than $500 million worth of federal funds. And so the use of those funds, we had to use those funds on a timeline. And we were told to use these funds to shore up your losses and prepare yourself for the loss of those funds at some point. And so one of the reasons why people set aside reserves is because we knew this $550 million would go away. And it did go away for the FY26 budget. We received funds last from this pot in the current fiscal year that will end soon, the FY25 allotment of $170 million in ARPA funds. So that's the last of the ARPA funds. Another reason for reserve growth, as I alluded to a little bit earlier, was when we are told that we should cut our budgets, reduce our expenditures, and the legislature chooses to restore some of those cuts or give us more money, that creates a situation where you create cost savings and you create more revenue that adds, it creates surpluses that adds to the reserves. But over the past few years, we have cut $106 million out of our budget system-wide just since the pandemic. So that certainly is driving, if you're not spending it, you're holding on to it. So that contributes to the reserve growth. The policies that we are proposing to change in the last conversation have, in my opinion, have compelled us to set aside more than was necessary. The university, and I said earlier that they were very specific. This bullet, university reserve policy, says 5 to 7% of expenses. That would create anywhere from $38 million to $54 million. When the debt service requirement tends to range between 27 million and 30 million. That number will change from year to year. That debt service payment will change from year to year, but it tends to be between 27 and 30 million dollars. So the policy itself has compelled universities to set aside more than they would have otherwise. And in doing so, we've transferred more to system office to make those payments than we might have otherwise. The slide shows that we have transferred to system office anywhere from 9 to 28% more than we've needed in transfers. So the policy is meant to correct these two bullets that I think have contributed to elevated levels of reserves. In effect, what it will do is try to leave more money at the campus, use as much as we can from system office. I'll propose that in a couple of slides later. But ultimately, the policy itself, the old policy, I think has also contributed to our elevated reserves. And finally, the consolidation of the 12 community college, a major underpinning, still creates challenges for budgeting because budgeting starts at the campus level and then rolls up to CT State. There are still some practices that I think that we're still working on to work better within a one college environment. Slide, please. Here is a picture of the institutional reserves. Each campus has designated reserves in blue and undesignated reserves, or what we call in the policy, current UMP, in yellow. You can see how Central and Eastern have relatively modest levels of current UMP. You see how Southern and Western, their share of their UMP is larger in terms of the current undesignated, but Western's number is relatively small. So while their undesignated level is nearly half of their UMP is well below what it should be. CT State has a large proportion of their reserves undesignated. That's partly a function of policy, their own policy that does not call for specific designations, and Charter Oak, which has what I think to be an appropriate amount of undesignated reserves relative to their entire UMP fund. So it is true that the designations dominate the reserves at the universities. But as I said earlier, the presidents of those universities are in the best position to judge the needs of those universities. And that statement does not preclude the authority of the board to provide guidance. And we will make sure the policy provides that guidance. Slide, please. So one of the biggest concerns that were raised about reserves were the reserves that we are sitting on here in system office. It is appropriate for the funds to be at the institutional level because that's where the work is done. That's where the students are taught. That's where the students are taken care of. So we shouldn't be holding more than is necessary at system office. So let me explain this $129 million that we are sitting on here in system office. You can see in the pie chart that most of that is designated, and a smaller proportion of it, 23 million, is undesignated. Slide, please. This is the designated portion. So this is a full pie of the blue piece from the previous slide that comprises 105.9 million. You can easily see that most of it is debt service fund. So this means we've been collecting more debt service transfers from the universities that have over time added up. The excess collections, the excess transfers have over 15, 20, 25 or more years added up. In FY10, for example, this debt service fund was sitting around $42 million. So in 15 years, from FY10 to FY25, that excess transfer has generated $47 million. So the policy is designed to limit debt service collections that we make. And we will talk here in a minute about what we might propose to do with the some portion of the $89 million. And then the remainder, the yellow slice for contingency, that 1.5 contingency is from board policy, just $10 million. That's just monies that have accumulated over time. And then the $6.7 million, the red slice, this is for accrued compensated absences. When people leave our employ, they are due payout of their accrued sick day, not sick days, but accrued vacation days and such. So it's appropriate to set aside funds to make sure we can pay those payouts when people leave. Next slide, please. And this is the $23 million of undesignated reserves we are sitting on here at the system office. The source comes from, the source of these funds come from the BOR initiatives that comprise the $9 million. The board was collecting about $600,000 a year for potential BOR initiatives. That money has been adding up over time when we've not spent that money for specific BOR initiatives. So that's what comprises the 9 million. The 4.7 million is funds that we received from the state to support the Office of the Building Inspector. This is sort of leftover funds from that effort. 7.1 is the balance of holdback funds. I think you may recall we were holding this for the retirement incentive that we wanted to pass about a year ago, that we really just weren't able to the extent that we wanted. So excess funds remain from that attempt. And finally, excesses of appropriations and tuition transfers of $2.3 million. So this comprises the undesignated funds that we are sitting on here at System. So between the designated funds of 105 million and the undesignated funds of 23 million, we have some thoughts about what we might do with these reserves. Next slide, please. So what we are proposing is to use 50 million of the $129 million of system office reserves. Use 40 million of it in 26 and use 10 million of it in 27. The $30 million, what we are proposing here is to pay the debt service for the FY26 fiscal year, pay that out of system office reserves. And what that will do is free up the transfers for the universities so that they can support strategic initiatives, help deal with their deficits and the like. So normally what would happen is we would transfer money from the universities to system office. System office would put the debt payment in a STIF account at the treasurer's office. And then CHIFA, our lending agent, would grab that money from the STIF account to make the debt service payment to the bank. Okay, well, what the general counsel and I have worked with the Treasury on is a methodology by which we can make the debt service payment from the central office reserves holding the universities harmless for 1 year on debt service payments. There's a little bit of mechanism we got to work out. It's not really worth talking about here, but in effect, that mechanism satisfies Treasury and still satisfies our goal of holding the universities harmless from making debt service transfers for FY26. That amounts to $30 million of relief for the universities. The $10 million in 26 and the $10 million in 27 are monies that would come out of the 23 million of undesignated reserves, and that could be used however the board believes it should be used, whether for strategic initiatives or whether for specific investments that the board would like to see.
Lloyd, can we use some of that money for scholarships or financial aid, or for reducing fees to the students as that we go forward? Those dollars right there?
We could, but we'd have to do it on a one-time basis, sir. Because once you use that 10 million, it's gone.
I understand, right?
So yeah, it would,
One-shot
it could be a one-shot savings on fees. It could be a one-shot enhancement of financial aid, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If we wanted to make those permanent enhancements of financial aid, for example, it would have to come out of recurring dollars.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. And finally, this is the sort of slide that summarizes this presentation, which shows how System Office would go from $129 million to $79 million. That's spending the $50 million I just suggested on the last slide. But why do we leave so much in System Office? Well, let me explain. 45 million of that $79 million has already been spoken for in terms of debt and for deferred maintenance. That 25 million had been held because of some challenges that we had with it being blocked. We have since addressed those challenges, signed a letter of agreement with Chifa to free up $25 million. That agreement is executed. $25 million is now freed up. And our Vice President for Facilities is looking at how that will be spent across the system. Excuse me. The blue slice of the pie is $30 million to be held for debt reserves. Remember, I said that the SCARF account, the Special Capital Reserve Fund, has about 39 million. This is a different 39 million. The first 39 million within the SCARF should not be touched. The only reason to touch that is if you're in default. And we don't want to get anywhere close to default, which is why I'm suggesting that we hold 30 million of the 79 million in reserve as coverage, additional debt coverage. What this will do is give bond holders, bond investors confidence that we have the proper level of coverage to make the associated payments so that we can get the best price we can for bonds we might float. And finally, after we use the 25 million and the 30 million, there would be 24 million left. And there, we might hold on to some of that for contingency, and we might use some of that for a banner refresh that we are about to undertake. What's happening here in June, we will have to renew the contract for our enterprise resource management systems, banner, across the system. That will be a $50 million expense. Most of that expense is already budgeted for at the institutions because they make the annual service payments for the use of banner. But what they haven't budgeted for is the implementation of a new system. This new contract that we will sign in June will be for 7 years, will include a transition to software as a service. Basically what that means is the banner and the rest of the industry of ERPs for higher ed are moving from on-prem services, on-premise services, meaning hardware servers, to software as a service, SaaS, which means it's going to be in the cloud, it's going to be a different pricing structure, And it'll just be a different way in which these companies provide universities and colleges with services. But I'm suggesting that we set aside the piece that the universities and colleges have not set aside for the renewal of these assets. And so that's what the 16 million banner renewal is for. So this is merely a proposal, something for the regents to consider. This can be changed, and we can continue to have conversations about how best to use these resources for our students. I'm happy to take your questions.
Any comments?
Yeah, Lloyd, around the banner, we're moving to a SaaS model. Was the previous, I assume the previous one was on a depreciation schedule?
The previous one was purchased through a unique loan, but it was that unique loan that got us in a bit of trouble that froze the $25 million of deferred maintenance funds. That was the letter and agreement that we had to enter into with Chifa to free up. So certainly we can borrow money to pay for this and amortize it as you would any loan. But we can use these funds to pay for the implementation on an annual basis because it'll be a kind of a serial implementation schedule.
I guess what I'm getting at is the renewal of banner have an implication on the balance sheet, or is it just an income statement annual expense for the multi-year period? Do we have to reserve the contractual amount on the balance sheet?
I'm going to ask my controller to answer your question, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
So a couple of years ago, the GASB put out a standard called it's GASB 96, which is subscription-based information technology agreements, or we call them SBITAs. And so Banner would be considered a SBITA, which is basically a long-term commitment that you're paying for over several years. We're committed to pay it over several years. In prior years, before this GASB, that would just be expensed and it would not show up on the balance sheet. But now
Right.
that now we have this GASB, it actually ends up being an asset that you put on the balance sheet and amortize over the life of the contract.
So
And the
GASB
commitment, it shows as a liability to the other
So
side.
the liability on the balance sheet is for the full length of the agreement, then
It
the
is,
expense comes off as incurred.
right. It's the amount is calculated, the liability is calculated at the you use a discount rate to discount it down. It's not like the full amount, it's discounted, and then you record the asset. So the asset depreciates and the liability gets amortized as you're paying it.
Okay. And is that a WAC rate, or is it a standard discount on LIBOR? What's that discount rate?
Well, basically, if there's not a discount rate that is built into the contract, which there usually isn't, you would take the discount rate that basically what is the discount rate that we would use to borrow money at the institution level. So we have a calculation to figure out what that is.
Okay, thank you.
Charlene?
Thank you. So, and I'm going to just start a little bit backwards. The $89.2 million of the about 129 million is specific to the universities because those university students paid a fee that was swept by the system office to over time create this pool. The intention of those funds were to make investments, service debt related to auxiliary buildings. Auxiliary buildings, for people who may not be familiar, includes parking garages, residence halls, dining facilities, student centers. And so when we start to think about using, and again, it's hard, the 129 is kind of commingled with money that's just kind of accumulated for different purposes. I do think attention has to be paid, right? That those are fees that students from universities paid. And we need to, I think, recognize that those weren't funds that every student across the whole system paid for, right? Those were university things. And if you're going to now deplete the reserves in a way that kind of may in the future tie your hands for future debt sales, you really have to, I mean, I took a tour of Western, and there's definitely opportunity for improvements in the auxiliary buildings. I'm sure if we went over all the campuses. And so I just want to ensure, as we think of different ways now to use these funds that were intended for auxiliary buildings, then there has to be a plan, and making sure that we don't go so far. All right. I mean, this is accumulated, and you know, we definitely need to put money to work. But I want to make sure that someone is now taking a step back and thinking about what are the needs of the university auxiliary buildings that rely on these funds that students have paid into. If we go forward with this proposal, will we be positioned so that we will be able to have future bond sales, or whether you pay direct for some of these activities? Because out of fairness to the universities, it's been since 2019 since there was a bond sale. So I just, again, I'm not asking for an explanation here, but I would ask that before some of these decisions are made, that we ensure that we feel comfortable that the universities will be supported, and this won't box them out in some way, because Banner is an important thing and we should do it, right? We need to do it. But you know, using money intended to shore up residence halls, which are revenue drivers for the campuses, you know, may not be the right stream of funding. So that's one. Two, on the Banner renewal, when you move things to the cloud, you know, that's going to change the work of our of the employees. You know, and I know that as these different changes happen, you know, it's some of the work that was done in the past may not be needed in the same manner, and some thought has to be, you know, some analysis of what that looks like over time, and what the opportunities are. And I'm going to use an example. If we need 10 fewer people to maintain on-prem services, then as we look at positions that we're hiring for, if those employees could be trained, if they don't already have those skills, but generally when you're moving things to the cloud, those employees that were maintaining some of those other things, that, you know, you need a real strategy as how to get there, so that we're able to, you know, fully leverage, you know, all our resources. And, you know, it's hard, that kind of, you know, you need a plan to make that happen, so that we don't continue to hire in certain areas, as opposed to leveraging some of the resources we already have that may be needed in a different way in the future. So thank you for the opportunity to share that insight.
Yeah, thank you, Regent Casamento. In response to your first point, the designated funds, the university fees that the students pay, that are not earmarked, but that are pledged for debt service, that finds its way into the designated funds. And so that's the larger $89 million. That, the $30 million that we're proposing to provide debt relief comes out of that $89 million. So that is still consistent with the purposes intended. The other 10 million here, 10 million there comes out of the 23 million of undesignated system office reserves, which has different sources. I showed those sources, the BOR initiatives, the excesses from the building inspector, et cetera, et cetera. So those are different sources of funds and not necessarily from the student fees. So I think that would satisfy your concern about having student fees pledged for debt service being used for other purposes. And to
Yeah,
your second point,
sorry, just to clarify, my point was really about the banner renewal in particular.
that was your second
which-
point, and I'm happy to address that.
Yep.
And that point was that to do analysis and strategy and planning around that change that could implicate fewer employees. I absolutely agree with you and have had that conversation with our chief information officer, who is well aware of the potential for a sort of a changed need for his staff to support software as a service rather than software on premise. But I can work with Michael to provide some kind of plan for you at the right time. I think it would be appropriate to have that be sent to the tech committee to show the board what those plans are. But I think that's a very good point, Regent Casamento, and thank you for it.
Brendan, you have a comment?
Yeah, actually, one comment and two questions. So I just wanted to say hats off to Dr. Blanchard for this presentation. Legend has it that among management, the rule of thumb on reserves is that you never talk about reserves. So in my view, this is a bit of a high wire act, and I appreciate this level of transparency and engagement by regents. I think this is exactly what we need to do in order to serve our students well. My first question, and I have a follow-up depending upon the answer, is the $109 million in reduced spending since 2019 that you cite, Dr. Blanchard, is that adjusted for inflation?
No, I've not calculated any inflation on that number.
Okay, so when I did do that, the number is actually closer to 400 million, which is actually somewhat close to the reserve accumulation. And the second question I had is about the timeline. Is there an RFP on the banner renewal, or is it already been determined that we're sticking with this vendor?
We've gone through a process by which we've made the determination that the cost associated with moving to an RFP would be far greater than continuing with the current vendor.
Okay, thank you.
Brendan, I have to understand, and we'll do this offline, the $400 million calculation on the 109 million in savings, 105 million.
I just converted the values using the consumer price index, but I would defer to staff on how they would want to do that. But $2019 had a whole lot more purchasing power than $2025 because of inflation. So,
yep.
Thank you. I think Regent Casamento has her hand up again. Is that from previous question or is that a new one?
Sorry, my apologies. No more questions.
Thank you.
Good questions.
Anything else? If not, we're going to move on to the Social Impact Partners report. And I'll turn that over to you, but I guess somebody else is going to help us with it.
Yeah. If I may, I'll just introduce Chris Rivers, who is the Director of Social Impact Consulting at Social Impact Partners. We've engaged with Social Impact Partners to help us think about what's possible for future investments across the system. And so with that, Chris, you ready for us?
I am ready. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Blanchard, and thank you everyone for the time. I know we're coming to the end of the meeting, so fair warning, I'm going to step through these slides very quickly. The slides are in the read ahead, and more importantly, the full draft of our report is also in the read ahead materials. So if regents or any other participating members want some more detailed view, it is there to be read. I am going to gloss over the absolute wave tops here. And so first and foremost, I just want to start by saying we at Social Impact Partners really understand that CSU holds a very unique position in Connecticut, trying to serve students of all backgrounds. Several of us on the team, including myself, are graduates of the system in some way, shape, or form. And so we understand that CSU as an entire system is really here to serve all of Connecticut, and particularly the students who may not have opportunities at other higher ed institutions within our state.
Cell phone, I don't know where
With that being said, we were very happy to provide this work pro bono because we really identify with the overall mission of CSU as a pathway to economic mobility for Connecticut residents, no matter where they're coming from on the economic ladder or the opportunity scale. The way we approached this work was really in two threads. We did a detailed data-driven assessment based on a framework that I'll share in a moment. And then we've launched over 100 focus groups covering about 600 individuals to really understand the perceptions of what is driving the student journey. We use those two processes in addition to some best practice research that we did of what is going on well within CSU and what's going on well in other states to try to come up with a set of strategic priorities that we think are truly system-wide and would truly move the needle for students. So in order to do the data-driven work, we really focused on overarching main pillars. What's really driving enrollment? What's really driving retention and completion? And then what's really driving the outcomes that our students are experiencing? And our take on outcomes is a student moving up the academic ladder is a good outcome. A student getting a good life sustaining job is also a good outcome. And so this work has been going on for about the last year and a couple months now, but this is fundamentally the framework that we approach all of our analyses with. What we found is, and probably not a surprise to anyone in this room, is that CSU enrollments have been declining faster than peer institutions. There are demographic explainers, and that is not likely to lighten up anytime soon. There's an affordability issue we can talk about here in a second. And then there's a lot of competition in the state in the realm of higher ed that some other states don't have to compete with nearly as much. In addition, we see that CSU students have lower retention and completion rates than some neighboring states and some peer institutions. We believe that the primary driver, and there's multiple drivers here, but the wave top driver that I want to talk about is on the 2-year side. We really think that the number of part-time students enrolled versus full-time students enrolled compared to other institutions in our neighborhood in this part of the country is a significant explainer of the overall graduation rate being less. Additionally, at the 4-year level, so all the CSUs and Charter Oak, we really see that the number of low-income or Pell eligible students is significantly higher. Neither of these are huge shockers, I think, when we look at the overall mission of CSU, but they are important to figure out what CSU can do that may be slightly different than what other institutions of higher ed in the state are doing. Finally, we really looked at what are students able to achieve when they're coming out of the programs across CSU. And here it's a bit of an interesting story to explain. Overall, you'll see a little bit less in economic earnings for CSU students compared to other students at other institutions of higher ed. And we particularly excluded the elite institutions. So we excluded Yale and Wesleyan and whatnot to try to make this as comparable within Connecticut. But what we see, and probably not a huge surprise, is that students who are in high demand areas tend to outperform students who are more on a general studies track. That is not the end all be all answer for higher ed, clearly, but it is something that we heard significantly from students being interested in learning more about what tracks are available, and that could lead to those higher paying career fields. So, and I know I'm stepping through this incredibly quickly, but here are basically the 5 recommendations that we came up with. Again, recommendations meant to be strategic in nature, meant to be overarching for the entire system. We really believe that there should be a statewide early college program, initiative, push, you can call it a bunch of different things. Other states who have funded early college across their entire states have seen significantly higher rates of enrollment, retention, and graduation rates. We'll get to some more specifics to that in a few more slides. The enhanced student support, we really looked at what MDRC has done in implementing the CUNY ASAP model, and at the 4-year level, the ACE model in New York. That same model has been implemented in a few other states. we really think that can serve as a basis for getting students to be able to go from part-time to full-time with a little bit extra incentives, a little bit extra advising support. And while that program may look expensive, we'll get to the numbers here in a few minutes, the actual cost per graduate goes down because the amount of retention and graduation rates go up dramatically in those states who have implemented it. Increased financial aid, looking at our neighboring states, we lag behind our neighboring states in the amount of financial aid that we offer. And so we tend to have a higher net tuition rate than our neighboring states do. So if we can increase financial aid, then you would open up more access to more students, so driving up enrollment, allowing more students to weather some of those fiscal storms that they may hit them personally, allowing them to stay in the programs to complete them. And then the fourth one is really about innovation oriented towards career pathways. There's a ton of great leaders all throughout the system at every level who have ideas of things they want to do to really make their programs better and more in line with what students are looking for. And having a set of funding to allow that to be a competitive grant process within CSU to really allow and empower people all throughout the system to create the change in their own programs would have significant impact across the entire student journey. And then lastly, the Workforce Development Coalition is this idea that Maine has already ran with the Herald Fund Foundation. And what they do in Maine in their community college system is really focus an entire center on short-term industry recognized credential earning training, short-term meaning 1 year or less. And really having that focus allows them to have a much tighter relationship with their employers. It also allows more students to get into the doors of their higher ed system. And so even though the students may go into the short-term training looking for a industry recognized credential, they end up looking around and saying, I really want to participate in this overall associate's or bachelor's program or master's program. And so they've seen higher enrollment rates and retention and job outcome rates. And that is the best practice that we think we can do here in Connecticut in a Connecticut specific way. The next few slides I will jump through even faster, and then I'll spend some time on the final slide. Here are really the big ideas I already covered with early college. This one already has some movement. It is already a recognized strategic goal for the K through 12 State Board of Education. We've heard a lot of people talk about early college here in Connecticut. The governor had it in his bill for, I believe, fiscal year 27, some initial funding for it. We really believe that Connecticut, while we were the first state in the country to have early college, has lagged behind what other states have been doing. And we think that there's a significant opportunity to dramatically improve that to the point where we would have 25% of all high school students earning early college credits, and to do that in a way that is oriented towards particular career pathways, allowing students to explore more options earlier on. The sort of MDRC CUNY ASOP model, we're calling it the Accelerated Completion Track here in Connecticut. Happy to change that name if it's too confusing with the Board of Regents Act framework, but we've seen the higher completion rates at the institutions who have implemented this. We have a lot of studies, and there's of course room to change the implementation of this to make it really meet the needs of students here in Connecticut, but we really believe that this is a best practice that we could mimic in a really good way. This is really what I was talking about with the overall financial aid, and the math to get us up to matching the sort of average of our neighboring states is relatively straightforward, but more financial aid from more students really open up more opportunities for students, especially on the lower side of the economic ladder. Career Pathways Innovation, already talked about this. This is really a competitive grant program meant to really incentivize and unlock the best ideas that faculty and leaders throughout the entire system have and are really eager to do. This money could be spent in a whole bunch of different ways. I think the key here is getting this sort of grant program set up well with really good rules to grade the submittals by to have the sort of effects that you want. So this money could be used for stipends for teachers who want to study, it could be used for a whole bunch of different things. I think there's so many good ideas in the system that really a little bit of support to be able to allow that to happen would have outsized impact. And then the Workforce Development Coalition Center is really taking what Maine has done, taking what we've done here in Connecticut with Career Connect and some other programs, and merging all those best practices to really be able to be a leader across our country in training opportunities for students, because the connection for those students is that they tend to be able to upskill in their jobs. They tend to be able to, the pre-hire training allows more students to get higher paying jobs, but also what I think on the academic side, we heard a lot from when we went up and visit Maine, is the amount of students who then take the opportunity to go enroll in programs is significantly higher than anyone there expected. And I think we would likely have something similar here. All right, so I know I'm nearly out of breath, nearly at the end, we're at the end of a long meeting, but the way that we oriented the much broader 75-page investment case report is that we wanted to have clear pilots for each of these 5 areas. The pilots are meant to be measured in about 2 years of implementation to really be able to measure some sort of outcome that could be used to really justify whether or not these strategic investment areas are having the sort of impact we think that they ought to be having to make a better decision on whether or not they should be scaled up, how much they should be scaled up, and really at what is the return on investment. Is this really meeting student needs? Is really the best way to figure that out is to pilot them and really measure if it's having the intended impact. So on the CSU impact, there's a sort of high level ideas of the sort of key metrics that you would see if it's going well, but having a solid 2-year pilot that allows you to really measure those outcomes, I think is absolutely key to really figuring out what the true scaling number is. The scaling number is the 6-year investment is really truly a rough order of magnitude. And even on the pilots, there's still more work to do on the implementation side. And all these things have particular drivers that can move that number up and down a little bit, but those are ballpark the numbers we're talking about. And then we went ahead and calculated the sort of net economic benefit, largely based on the likelihood of those students earning more in earnings in the first 10 years coming out of these programs. And the flip side of that is the sort of social benefit to the state of these students being less reliant on social programs and whatnot. So we wanted to do that as a check on these investment areas to make sure that for a state, they made sense, and individually they made sense when you add it all up together. But that's how we really want to frame everything out is here's the big ideas, here's the best practices, here's a solution to the problem that we think we're seeing in the system, and then here's how to pilot it to prove it, and then here's a ballpark of what we think it could really add up to so that everyone can enter this and make decisions and really take this all in with all of that context. So I think that's about as fast as I could possibly do it. Happy to pause here and take any questions.
Chris, can you go back to that last slide where you've got the investment of $5 million and the economic response is like 55 million, just to re-explain it? I want sure I'm clear on it. I just want to make sure, because it looks great. I just want to make sure it makes sense.
Absolutely happy to. I'm in the process of pulling it back up now.
You can see it.
Yeah, there you go. That last one, the $5 million pilot and the 55 and then the 237 million. Just quickly go through that again for me, that last piece. It's a
So
great
specifically
number.
for the-
It's,
Yeah, so if I think I understand the question right, for the Workforce Development Coalition concept, basically the pilot phase, year 1 of that would be specifically a couple staff members. Those staff people could be folks that are already working in the system. You could hire a couple folks, whatnot, but really they're the ones that need to set up a board to oversee how this money would be spent and also start forming relationships with employers. So up in Maine, the first 2 or 3 employees got MOUs, or sorry, memorandum of understanding, what they would call their compact agreement with employers. They started with 30, quickly became 60. Now it's 1,700. Those MOUs and those compact agreements basically say that in combination between some state money that they had from ARPA up in Maine and a large scale philanthropy from the Harold Fund Foundation, something to the order of magnitude of $75 million, then they would provide state or philanthropy resources for year 1 of training either incumbent workers or pre-hire workers, working with the employers for what sort of training they think they need. Then year 2, 3, 4, however long that relationship continues for, the employers match roughly 50-50 match. There's some employers, small businesses and whatnot, that are excluded from that. But at the end of the day, because the relationship with the employers are so strong and because they're so tied to industry recognized credentials, the way you get to such a high net economic benefit number is that those employers are highly incentivized to then hire those employees because they're also matching funds along the way. And so those students go through the training, and then they have clear paths to solid jobs because the employers are at the table along the entire way. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. It's a very big number, and I wondered how you went from 5 to 237, but that makes sense. Thank you.
No.
Any other comments by anybody, any other members?
I
Brendan,
have oh, go ahead.
you will be next. Absolutely, Charlene.
I think I was second, so I can wait. Sorry.
Here we go.
Thank you,
Charlene.
Dr. Cunningham. Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Cunningham, for recognizing me. My question is, and I know that we're going to spend a little more time digging into the numbers, and I appreciate that, but the Governor Lamont recommended as part of the biennial budget an appropriation for guided pathways. That guided pathways is my understanding that the institution actually went beyond what the governor's investment was. And so my first question is really understanding, in here there's a lot of discussion about enhanced student support. Again, wanting to understand how those pieces fit together. And then second, this is just a plug that Governor Lamont's recommended budget did include an inaugural, a permanent appropriation of $7.5 million for dual credit funds, which obviously is falls short of what this model would suggest, but is an important marker in terms of the level of investment and the fact that at least we have a place to start, assuming that recommendation ends up in the final budget. So if you could respond to the guided pathways question, that would be great.
Yep, happy to. And the guided pathways for here, I believe we're talking about the enhanced student support part of that. And really the main budget drivers there are, one, the amount of advisors to student ratio in the sort of MDRC CUNY ASAP model for the, let me take a step back. The enhanced student support model is really a cohort-based model. So students who are generally part-time who want to be full-time apply to get into a cohort. Once they get into that cohort, what they get is access to a student to advisor ratio of 1 advisor to 75 students. The normal practice here in CSU and in most institutions of higher ed is that normally that ratio is more like 1 to a couple hundred students. And so you're getting access as a student to a lot more of the advisor's time. In addition to that, the advisors would be in part academic advisors to help navigate the sort of academic scheduling and whatnot, but also career advisors to make sure that whatever your interest is, and to be totally clear, we understand that a lot of students at CSU are exploring and trying to figure out what their interests are. So figuring out as their career ambitions shift and how does that relate back to their academic programming and whatnot is something a lot of students currently struggle with. So with a much lower student to advisor ratio, includes both academic and career advisors in sort of one cohort model, it allows them to navigate that much better. In addition to that, you would have milestone incentives. So the students who need a little bit extra support because they're taking time out of their part-time jobs or their full-time jobs in order to attend class, or the students who need the little bit extra motivation to make it to the next year. There's very, very small milestone incentives to get them over those humps, because that's usually where you see students drop out. If something will happen and it will just seem too far away. And so those are basically the major budget drivers there. But the biggest budget driver there is a sort of a student to advisor ratio, but it would be limited to the cohort of students who apply to get into it as a sort of control mechanism and the big idea. Does that answer your question, Charlene?
Well, mine was more about the guided pathway advisors investment that we made a few years ago, for which I understand there was more of them than what might have been needed. And maybe at some point when we connect, we could have a deeper conversation about that. But thank you so much.
Happy to. And the other part that you brought up, the governor's $7.5 million in fiscal year 27, I believe. largely, I think that was in line with what we had been working on for a long time. The thing that threw our number up for the pilot, and our pilot would be the first 2 years. So fiscal year 27 would be one of those 2 years. I think is we had to wrestle with transportation costs, and we're still wrestling with that of how to calculate that. So when we connect later on, happy to dissect that one a little more. I don't think we're as far off as this slide makes it appear, though.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Anybody? Brendan, you have your, I see your hand up, or is this left over from before?
Yeah, this is new. So I just wanted to point out one particular recommendation from this report, which was the expansion of the Mary Ann Handley or PACT program to the CSUs. I need to actually give a shout out to my AAUP colleagues because we anticipated that recommendation and started that work last summer with an AFT grant. We put in the work to expand that program to the CSUs. We collaborated with management on that. And at least out of the appropriations committee, there's money behind that for CSUs. So I bring that up because I think there's an opportunity to listen a lot more to faculty about what we can do to put us on a good path, because our work, which again, we started a year ago, has been affirmed by that recommendation. So in that vein, my second remark is a quote from Pittsburgh Steelers coach Chuck Noll, who says, "If you want to win, do the ordinary things better than anyone else does them, day in and day out." A lot of these programs seem extraordinarily impressive, but as I mentioned earlier in this meeting, I'm not sure we're doing the ordinary things better than the others, day in and day out. And I would encourage the regents to ask hard questions about that, considering again the fact that we have so many programs taught by underpaid part-time faculty. I'm really worried that if we go down this road of all these additional add-ons, we're going to end up with a Rolls Royce that we have to haul around with a donkey because the engine doesn't work. So those are my remarks in response to this, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Brendan. Any other comments? If not, there any other business to come before the committee today? If not, then I will move for adjournment. Is there a second? Thank you, Aaron. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye, opposed. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you all. Yeah, I was.
We're going to cut the stream.